There's a lot of people out there that scoff, even completely discount the fact that Boris Johnson might be able to make some sort of, well, comeback into politics. And of course, he did try after Liz Truss fell. His initial attempt to go over to Sunak and go, "Oh, Rishi, old pal, you'll never win against me. You know, if this goes to the membership, I'll win outright. So tell you what, how about we do a deal? How about we just go back to the status quo? I'll be prime minister, you be my treasurer, and we'll sort things out." Or there may be some sort of other maybe deal done where maybe Boris was brought in to be his second or something else. We don't know. There's never been sort of any concrete details about what exactly happened in that meeting, but we do know that there was an attempt by Boris to try and sort of get Sunak out of the running, or at least in some way bring Boris back into sort of a cabinet governmental position. But since then, Sunak has had, well, he's got no political capital. Boris is still very, very popular in the non-parliamentary party. And of course, there is shall we say, a Boris grouping in the Conservative Parliamentary Tory party. So it is not beyond the realms of possibility that, looking at the polls, the way they are, where we are seeing a estimated complete and utter Tory wipeout, that the Tories may, in an act of sheer desperation, may try to bring back Boris Johnson. And we've talked about this possibility before, but there are many, many different ways that this could potentially happen. And we're going to talk about one of those ways today. And this has a lot to do with the May local elections, because, well, it looks like that Boris may be planning maybe potentially a springtime comeback. It is not beyond the realms of possibility. But of course, as always, before we do go diving into this, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and one additional link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, there is the YouTube thank you button as well down below. And of course, there's the Pony Club as well. So over we go to The Guardian with their story on this, with the title of, "Will Boris Johnson stage a comeback? Sunak may only have 5 months to find out." 3 years ago this week, Boris Johnson was looking ahead to a long premiership, 8 years at least, as the result broke of a majority of 80 in the 2019 election that the Prime Minister pitched himself as a Blair-like figure. Heading to Sedgefield, where his party had turned the former Prime Minister's seat blue for his victory rally. The implication was clear. Johnson was a leader who would be as influential and as long-lasting in British politics as Tony Blair. Well, I think you can certainly judge the difference. And, don't get me wrong, Blair's got his faults, but I'll tell you this now. I would far, far, far rather prefer Tony Blair a leadership rather than a Boris Johnson leadership. Yeah, I can guarantee you that. But whatever. We'll never ever get that sort of a matchup, I think. But anyway, back to it. So, fast forward to today, and things look rather different. Johnson is out on the backbenches, having been forced to resign in the face of successive scandals. And after Liz Truss's short stint in the job, he launched one aborted attempt to return. His former Chancellor and political rival Rishi Sunak is now in charge, and the polls suggest that the Conservatives are on course for a heavy defeat at the next election, which could even include Johnson's own seat of Uxbridge and South Ruislip. And like I say, these polls, some of them, like I say, the one that we went over today shows, well, two things, if you may remember from the video. First of all, the Conservatives are going to lose potentially all the coastal seats. Remember, these seats not only voted very heavily in favour of Brexit in 2016, but also massively supported Johnson in 2019. So the fact that all these seats are going to flip away from the Conservatives is incredible. And even more shocking with the fact that another poll came out just as recently to say that the Conservatives, well, they're not the Conservatives, that the Tories would absolutely be wiped out, with Labour winning potentially a 400-seat majority. That would be massive, absolutely massive. And yet, I think if polls like that continue to come out, the Tories are going to get desperate and they are going to reach out to Boris Johnson. That is absolutely certain. And maybe we could see a case where Rishi Sunak might be forced maybe to bring Boris Johnson back into government, and maybe in some way, shape, or form, maybe to try and see off this potential rebellion. It's a possibility. But then again, Johnson in cabinet and Johnson in the backbenchers do pose two very different kinds of threats to Rishi Sunak. So back to it. Yeah, the news this month that Johnson will stand again as an MP in 2024 is a source of intrigue in Westminster. Many of those backing the new leader had hoped that the last leader would just walk off into the sunset of the well-laid lecture circuit. He was certainly finding it lucrative. Parliamentary records suggest he has made more than £1 million since leaving Number 10. And there is a chance that he gets sick of declaring all these extra earnings and just heads for the exit, said one former minister wistfully at the time. Instead, to the delight of his supporters and horror of his critics, Johnson plans to stick around for the foreseeable. Like say, Boris Johnson's shadow is indeed casting a very, very long one indeed. So with Truss, Johnson's direct successor, also choosing to stand again, it means that Sunak faces the prospect of having two very recent former prime ministers with unfinished business in the Commons. Neither of them have shown any sign that they will make life easy for the new prime minister. Both put their names to the amendment by the former cabinet minister Simon Clarke, designed to allow onshore wind farms to be built. And it is unheard of for former prime ministers to start signing amendments so quickly after leaving office. And as we said at the time, I said Johnson is going to cause trouble. You know, he was certainly going to cause trouble for Liz Truss, and he is absolutely certain he is going to cause trouble for Rishi Sunak. I do not think this will be the last time we see both, Johnson and Truss try to really go and damage Sunak in some way. But back to it. Another MP adds that Johnson isn't exactly being demure. His closest allies have made it very clear he is still around, they explain. Theresa May was very discreet when she returned to the Commons after stepping down, but he will always have a crowd around him when he's in Parliament. Just this week, Sunak, Truss and Johnson gathered in the same room for the Conservative Friends of Israel's annual business lunch. Everyone stood up to give Rishi a standing ovation. And calls one attendant at the bash, it was pretty awkward for Boris, who had to join in. Meanwhile, prominent Johnson backers, Priti Patel and the Tory donor Lord Carruthers, had given their support to the new Conservative Democratic organisation. Yet another group that now Rishi Sunak now has to juggle, because there are just so many of them. But back to it. A group described by one member of the 29 intake as clearly anti-Rishi, which seeks to restore democracy. Whatever that means. We have democracy, but there you go. But anyway, back to it, which seeks to restore democracy within the Tory party. It claims that the party members ought to be empowered with more of a say in the direction of policy and leadership of the party after MPs were allowed to topple two prime ministers in the space of a few months. And when Johnson flirted with the idea of a comeback after Truss resigned, he and his supporters repeatedly suggested that it had been down to the members rather than MPs that he would have won over Sunak. Former party chairman Jake Berry has even gone further, declaring in an interview saying, "I think Boris will come back. I wouldn't say when, but I think he will come back. He's a bit like the Conservative Party's mistress, something he knows about. The tempting other woman, the king over the sea. Berry's point is that if MPs get desperate, that's when the call will come. And if the Tories keep trailing behind Labour by 20 points, and MPs are already bracing themselves for an attempt by Johnson supporters to pitch the former Prime Minister as the solution. It's very clear that they are creating the infrastructure in Parliament and outside to mount a comeback, argues one senior Tory. While it's not obvious now, in May of 2023 would be the opening if we suffer big losses in parts of the country. The view in the Johnson camp is effectively that Truss blew her premiership up too soon for Johnson to return. And she managed to hang on for a bit longer until the local elections and until Johnson was past the Privilege Committee inquiry into whether he misled the Commons, which could, in theory, lead to a suspension and spark a by-election in his seat. Then they believe that he could be the clear favourite to take over. Instead, Johnson had the Privilege Committee hanging over him and a leadership election that was about the bond markets. Sunak could then find himself facing a very restive party and an old-time political rival in 6 months' time if he can't show progress. But for now, more MPs than not view a Johnson comeback in the spring as implausible. They are deluding themselves if they think that Boris is back before the next election, says a former government aide. MPs have not forgotten, but one MP in the middle of the party points that Johnson did technically, as verified by Sir Graham Bradley, receive over 100 nominations in the last time around. If he could do that at his most discredited, it suggests he has the base. And the members of the 2015 intake says there's not an appetite now, but 2019 is uniquely Boris's coalition. If the local election results are poor, it could focus minds. It will be totally wild, but they would have had wild times for years. That's the incredible thing. The fact that even Tory MPs would get so desperate to reach the Boris Johnson. I mean, they are completely out of their mind. You've got to remember, by the time and the end of the Johnson administration, Johnson's poll ratings were dropping like a stone. And it is very likely that if somehow Johnson had managed to survive, his poll ratings would not be looking good right now. Because do you think Johnson could handle the cost of living crisis, the energy crisis? Absolutely not. This is not Johnson's forte. Johnson is first and foremost a cheerleader. He is not a solutions person. And we need a government that can come up with solutions and react to problems as they are. But the problem is, Johnson was always a very reactionary government. There would be a problem coming along. Everyone could see the problem coming along. And what did Johnson do? He sat on his hands and waited until the problem hit and then went, guess we'll have to do something about it. That's not how you should run an effective government. But back to it. So, should the Johnson 2.0 fail to take off, there could still be a vacancy to fill in 2 years' time, with a number of Tory MPs already taking the view that the next election is lost. It's not uncommon to hear Conservative MPs discussing who, in the event of an election loss, would be certainly the leader in the opposition. In such circumstances, the party would probably move to the right and go back to its core values, including low taxes. And I also think there would be a massive Tory rebellion. Trust me on that one. Once they are out of power, there will be an almighty internal battle about the direction that the Conservative Party is going to take. And it will be between these free market fundamentalists in the party, the Brexiteers, versus essentially what is now left of the sane and somewhat rational Conservatives. But then again, many of them have been out of the party, well, at least certainly the parliamentary party for some time, but they have remained in the sort of the wider Conservative Party itself. It depends whether or not they have any power. But then again, once the Conservatives, shall we say, are out of power, anything could go, anything could happen. And we are in, I would certainly say, for a very, very split party. I mean, they already can't control the party now as it is. How whoever can even control the party, even Boris Johnson, who, as his tenure was going on, was struggling even more to keep his party in check. So even if Boris Johnson came back into power as the leader in the opposition, he can't control the party. No way. Because he's got no goodies to give out. He's got no favors to give. He will not be able to control the party. And like I say, there will be it is going to get a knife fight time, literally, in the Conservative Party once they lose power. That is absolutely for sure. So back to it. So while a lot of MPs and aides predict that the Tory rising star, Kimi Badenoch, would make the most likely candidate, others think a more experienced figure could step in. You may laugh, but it's not impossible. It's Boris or Liz, argues a former government advisor. And such moves, of course, would face a backlash. But the thinking amongst those who backed Johnson and then Truss is that the party would need someone radical and experienced, which could be missing in the younger intakes. Since entering number 10, Sunak and his team have been on a mission to take the, quote, sugar rush out of politics after a high-octane year of the Tory psychodrama. They have had some successes, but if Sunak is to succeed in the long run, his 2023 challenge isn't just to show progress on the economy and public services, it's also to keep his own critics and rivals at bay. And this thing this year, if it is really to be the saving grace of Rishi Sunak, he already can't control the party. That is very obvious. He has no political capital. There is absolutely no political room to maneuver. We have already seen these Tory rebellions pop up, and not just a Tory rebellion about one thing. We've seen a rebellion in response to a rebellion in recent times. The whole NIMBYism, YIMBYism debate is still raging on in the Conservative Party, and it is not a good look for them. And bear in mind, these arguments, these discussions do not go away if, let's say magically, somehow, Johnson's Christmas wish comes true and he's magically swept in to be Prime Minister in January, magically somehow. It's a Christmas miracle. These arguments, these discussions, these rebellions do not go away. And Johnson is the type of leader who cannot deal with these rebellions. He was already having enough problems trying to deal with them. He had reached a point before, when he lost, where he was at the point promising these groups, don't worry, you'll get what's coming to you. I remember I promised you this, you'll get it. Don't worry. They were at their ends tether saying, you promised us this. Where is it? It's time for you to deliver. And of course, Johnson got the boot before he had to actually finally deliver. But when he did actually have to start finally deliver, oh boy, would these groups have been upset. They would have been absolutely upset. So make no mistake, if Johnson does come back in a spring and we get like the Johnson 2.0, these groups aren't going anywhere. These groups are going to be even worse because they've become even worse now under Sunak. And even if you do bring back Johnson, the public mood was very, very clear. We are fed up of Johnson. We are fed up of his antics. We are fed up of his lying. We don't want him. So, as always, guys, like I say, thank you very much for watching, and please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button on your way out. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.